On the 11th of April 2024, a construction crew began work in house number 27 on Waldstrasse in the Stepnoi settlement. The old, partially rotted kitchen floor had to be replaced. The workers dismantled the boards, but when they moved the old cabinet at the back wall, they discovered a hidden hatch of 60 by 60 centimeters. Below it was a small niche only about 80 centimeters deep. At its bottom lay the mortal remains of 7-year-old Anton K., who was tied with a metal wire on his leg to a heating pipe. There, among old sawdust, criminalists also found a plastic spoon. Anton's parents, Sergei K. and Irina K., immediately told police that Anton had been with his grandmother for a month. However, medical examination confirmed that the last signs of life in Anton were detected no earlier than early March. This meant that the boy had not left the house and the parents were concealing his whereabouts for unknown reasons. Investigators began examining the details. The wire cable with which Anton was tied was attached to the heating pipe with a padlock. The lock itself was intact and undamaged. This meant that Anton could not free himself and outsiders could not intervene without a key. Criminalists noticed fresh wood chips on the basement floor. In the house's yard, a shed was found containing a recently used chainsaw. The lubricating oil on the chainsaw's chain had not yet dried, indicating that work to seal or open the basement had been carried out recently. Investigators also documented microscopic fragments of new linoleum at the edges of the hatch that exactly matched the batch that the family had purchased in February 2024 at the Stroy Market store. This discovery confirmed the mother's words about recent renovation work, but strengthened suspicion of a conscious attempt to hide the existence of the niche under the kitchen floor. The investigation began by checking neighbors and the family's environment. In the first phases, attention focused on two people: the boy's father, Sergei K., and neighbor Victor P. Sergei K., a 35-year-old man, worked as a truck driver. Neighbors described him as a quiet and withdrawn person who had almost no contact with local residents. Police had no previous complaints against him, but he remained under close observation for now. Victor P., a neighbor of the family, had long been known to law enforcement. In the past, he had problems with the law for thefts and domestic conflicts. Additionally, neighbors remembered that Victor had repeatedly come into conflict with Anton's family and relations were tense. On the 5th of March, pensioner Mikhail Z., who lived in the house opposite, reported important information to police. He heard Victor arguing loudly with someone small and suspected it might have been Anton. This statement seemed significant, and police immediately began checking Victor. Soon, however, the investigation received documented confirmation that Victor P. could not have been involved. From the 4th to 10th of March, he was in custody for hooliganism. Experts confirmed that no foreign DNA was present on the wire cable and in the basement. This fact completely excluded Victor's involvement in this case. The first suspicion collapsed almost immediately and the investigation concentrated on Anton's family. Police faced an obvious fact. Only members of the K family could control access to the hatch and chain. It became clear that one of the parents not only knew about the existence of the hiding place, but was also directly involved in organizing the entire operation. Now it was necessary to understand which of the spouses was consciously misleading the environment and why none of the neighbors had noticed Anton's disappearance during the entire month. Investigators turned to the family's medical and school documentation to clarify the situation in the house. Additional investigations were initiated to determine details about the family's lifestyle and understand what might have prompted the parents to such actions. The version of accidental circumstances was already completely excluded. The focus of the investigation shifted sharply from external suspects to inside the K family itself. The investigation officially declared that the version of external interference was excluded. Neighbors now viewed the family differently than before, wondering what circumstances in the house could have led to such an outcome. The investigation entered a new phase. Now investigators had to understand how and why the K family hid Anton, who exactly had the key to the lock on the wire cable, and why this was concealed with such care. All threads of the investigation converged at one point. Within the family circle, which at first glance appeared completely normal, now investigators had to understand the motives and actions of family members. Much meticulous work still lay ahead of them, but one thing was immediately clear. The mystery lay not in the environment, not in random conflicts with neighbors, but directly in the house itself. At this point, the investigation was just beginning to take clear shape, and investigators had to carefully examine every detail of this family's life to understand how events led to the terrible discovery under the kitchen boards. The investigation began examining the strange purchase that Sergei K. had made on the 29th of February 2024, 5 days before the unexpected inspection by social services workers. On the receipt from Stroy Market Store, issued in Irina K.'s name, were 3 items: a steel wire with 5 millimeters diameter, a padlock, and a piece of linoleum measuring 2 by 3 meters. Video cameras in the sales area showed exclusively Sergei calmly placing these items in the shopping cart and paying cash at the checkout. DVR1, 1080 PD, confirmed. Investigators checked data from the trace reading device installed on Federal Highway R176. The recording completely matched the route from Sergei's house to the store and back. Sergei drove 18 kilometers in his Vaz 2012 car in exactly 25 minutes each way. Police received direct confirmations that he had purchased materials for the future hiding place. During questioning on the 12th of April, Sergei answered confidently and casually. When the investigator asked about the purchase purposes, he explained that the wire cable was intended for well repair, and he wanted to use the linoleum in the greenhouse on his property. The task force immediately went to verify the statements. The well was examined by emergency ministry workers. It proved completely untouched, and the old greenhouse that stood in the backyard had already been dismantled in the autumn of the previous year. Thus, Sergei's proposed version immediately collapsed. Criminal experts quickly established another important detail. Sergei claimed that the wire cable lay in the shed after purchase and was not used. But microscopic particles of new linoleum from the same batch found on the basement hatch were also present on the wire cable itself. This meant that the wire cable was used after laying the new floor covering in the house directly in the basement. Investigators dug deeper and found that the new piece of linoleum had been laid directly over the old one. This was done specifically to camouflage the fresh cut of the hatch frame. Thus, the investigation came to a firm conclusion. Sergei had not simply impulsively decided to change something in the house. He purposefully purchased materials, carefully planned his actions, and consciously hid traces so that no outsider could notice the hidden space. The investigator questioned Sergei again regarding the new evidence. Now Sergei could not explain why linoleum traces were found on the wire cable, although he had previously insisted on not bringing the wire cable into the house. He began getting confused in details and confusedly referring to forgetfulness, which only strengthened investigators' suspicions. However, direct confessions or explanations from Sergei did not come. The investigation team received data from the K, family's mobile service provider. It turned out that on the 29th of February, exactly on the day of purchase, an SMS notification from social services about a planned inspection had arrived on Irina's phone. The inspection was scheduled for the 5th of March. Exactly at this moment, materials necessary for creating the hiding place were purchased. For investigators, it was obvious. Sergei knew in advance about the upcoming inspection and quickly took measures to hide something important from the social workers. Originally, Sergei claimed that the wire rope was purchased exclusively for domestic needs and had never left the shed. The forensic investigation completely refuted this statement. The wire rope was obviously used in the house and was an integral part of the construction of the hatch and the basement. This became another proof of Sergei's direct lie and finally destroyed his version. The investigation concluded that the basement was not a random place. It did not arise spontaneously and did not simply appear as a result of renovation work. It was a thoughtful, planned space specifically intended to hide Anton. The construction and dimensions of the niche were made precisely for restraint, and the lock and wire rope ensured the impossibility of getting out without external intervention. The police officers once again carefully examined the kitchen and documented the details of the hidden basement. Special attention was paid to the fact that no one except the family had access to the house, and especially to the key of the lock. All these facts confirmed the assumption that the creation of the hiding place was a conscious and thoughtful action, and Sergei became the main organizer. Now the investigation firmly held to one version. Everything that happened in house number 27 on Forest Street was a planned event, and not an accidental tragedy. The angle of the investigation shifted to clarifying the motives of the K, family, and the role of each member in organizing and implementing the planned action. The investigators prepared to examine Irina's personality more closely, since the purchases were formally issued to her, and Sergei obviously tried to minimize his involvement in organizing this event. Meanwhile, the investigators continued to document every action of Sergei's and carefully examined his behavior and environment. Everything indicated that the main plan was conceived precisely by him and implemented with maximum cold-bloodedness and calculation, without obvious signals or behavioral changes for the environment. The investigators' attention shifted to a strange circumstance. Anton was not seen by anyone for a whole month, although the parents assured that he had left the house on the morning of the 5th of March. Apparently, in a small settlement, such a disappearance should have been noticed by neighbors, teachers, or someone else. However, not a single witness was found who could confirm the parents' words. The investigators decided to delve deeper into this fact. A detailed analysis of Irina's phone activity began. In her phone, 18 SMS messages were found that were sent from the 6th to 8th of March to Anton's grandmother, Marina K. The texts of the messages looked completely normal, as a child might have sent. Requests, short answers, smileys, and even good night wishes. However, checking the geotags via cell ID, which are automatically attached by the provider to each message, showed something strange. All messages allegedly sent by Anton were sent from the K family house. This contradicted the parents' claims that Anton was already at his grandmother's when he sent these SMS. The investigators immediately contacted grandmother Marina K, a 58-year-old retiree who lived separately from the family in a neighboring region. Her status in the case was officially established as an uninvolved witness. Marina presented the investigation with an ironclad alibi. The entire March she spent in Tatarstan, 600 kilometers from Stepnoy. The MZHD train ticket number, 749,312, gas station receipts, and M7 highway cameras confirmed her words. The investigator called Irina for questioning again. Her calm explanation raised doubts. She claimed that Anton had written all messages in advance and asked to send them later. The investigator referred to the individual connection record of mobile operator MTS. The first message from the mother went out on the morning of the 6th of March at 10:12, already after the parents claimed that Anton was on his way to his grandmother. Irina could not explain this discrepancy and said that she might have confused the dates. However, the investigators documented this discrepancy as a clear sign of the parents' attempt to hide Anton's actual whereabouts. In the SMS details, the attempt to create the illusion that Anton was alive, healthy, and outside the house was clearly visible. For a brief moment, the investigators allowed the possibility that Anton had left the house independently and hidden somewhere in the settlement. To check this version, a dog handler group came to Stepnoy. Specialists with dogs carefully checked all abandoned buildings, nearby ravines and forest areas, but no traces of Anton's presence in these places were found. This allowed them to officially reject the escape version. Exactly at this moment, the investigation received an important report from the forensic medical examiner. According to the conclusions, Anton's tragic outcome occurred between the 6th and 8th of March, the cause of which was dehydration, that is, lack of water. This fact clearly indicated that Anton was in the basement, where the parents had brought him precisely during the social services inspection. The messages sent in Anton's name were only a cynical attempt to hide the true situation and delay suspicions. The investigation now completely excluded the accidental version. The facts pointed to cold calculation. The family created the illusion of normalcy while simultaneously hiding the situation with Anton from the environment. This was done with maximum care, to the point that none of the neighbors and acquaintances doubted the parents' story about the trip to grandmother. The investigators spoke with neighbors and tried to understand how such a strange blind zone could form. One of the neighbors mentioned in passing that the family feared social services inspections and often spoke about possible benefit cuts that could have occurred with negative conclusions from inspectors. But even this assumption was not yet fully clarified, as the motive was not yet officially confirmed by the investigation. Thus, the investigation concentrated completely on the personalities of Anton's parents and the events that took place in the house after the 5th of March. Now, taking into account the new data about the time of the tragedy, the investigation concluded that the parents consciously misled the environment and law enforcement agencies. At this point, the case was reclassified under the criminal offense of intentional killing of a minor. Both parents were now officially questioned precisely on this charge. The investigators prepared for the next phase of the investigation, which should already reveal the specific motives of the family and the degree of involvement of each parent in this tragic case. From this moment on, Anton's case ceased to be just a story about a strange disappearance and moved into the category of serious crimes, whose investigation was the duty of experienced investigators and criminologists. The investigation now faced collecting exhaustive evidence of guilt and fully understanding what role Irina and Sergei K. played in these events. Each of them, facing the prospect of a severe criminal sentence, might start talking and revealing details of what happened. But that was already a matter of the following interrogations, at which the main confessions should sound. The investigation turned to the events of the evening of the 9th of March. Exactly on this day, as the results of the criminologists showed, something was burned at the K family shed. The investigation was led to this fact by an unusual find from the fire laboratory. In the ash samples taken on the property, experts discovered melted PVC film pieces, a metal rivet, and a plastic clamp from packaging tape. According to batch numbers, these remains exactly matched the packaging of the wire rope with 5 mm diameter purchased by Sergei, which was marked with code 0424. At this point in the investigation, a new important witness appeared, 14-year-old Artem L., who lived in the opposite house. He became the first person who could make real statements about the events of the 9th of March. Artem told the investigator that on that evening, around 21:30, he had noticed a fire at the K family shed. The teenager claimed to be able to distinguish the silhouettes of both parents in the darkness. Artem observed the events from the second-floor window, but did not attach special significance to what he saw that evening, assuming that the neighbors were simply disposing of household waste. The investigator called Irina for questioning again. She confidently repeated the previously heard version about household garbage. According to her words, they simply burned old things, product packaging and other unnecessary stuff that had accumulated over the winter. Sergei, however, invoked Article 51 of the Constitution of the Russian Federation and refused to answer any questions about that evening, taking a position of silence. The investigation, however, quickly dispelled the investigators' doubts regarding Irina's words. With the help of FTIR spectroscopy, it was possible to determine that among the burned material were packaging film and labels from exactly that linoleum that was purchased on the 29th of February and laid in the kitchen of House K. The fact of destroying the packaging was documented by the investigation as a conscious action aimed at obscuring traces of the purchase. This discovery became the key moment of the investigation, as it directly connected the parents with actions to prepare and conceal the crime. Initially, the investigators formed the version that Anton's clothes were burned to hide important evidence. To check this hypothesis, an additional examination of the entire contents of the basement was conducted. As a result, Anton's winter jacket was found in the niche, on which there were completely no traces of fire exposure. This meant that the version with burning clothes was false and was officially rejected. The results of all examinations clearly confirmed one thing. The parents intentionally destroyed packaging to make it difficult to establish a connection between their purchases in the store and the equipped basement. Now the investigators finally rejected all domestic explanations of what exactly and why was burned at the shed on the evening of the 9th of March. The version of accidental destruction of household garbage did not stand up to verification and was completely discarded. The investigation requested the court for a sanction to arrest Sergei and Irina K., justifying the request by the fact that the suspects had already proven their readiness to destroy evidence and hinder the course of the investigation. Taking into account the previously revealed inconsistencies in their statements and direct evidence of intentional misleading of the investigation, the court immediately approved this request. Both parents were taken into custody until the completion of all procedural measures. The investigation entered the final phase. Now the investigators faced the task of establishing the motives of the crime, understanding the mental state of the accused and what exactly could prompt them to actions whose consequences were carefully hidden from the environment. In the next phase of work, the investigators began preparing a comprehensive psychiatric examination of both parents. This measure was necessary to understand the psychological mechanisms that led to the tragic events. Additionally, the investigation carefully examined the assumptions previously expressed by neighbors about the family's fear of social services, which could have become the starting point in taking such radical measures. However, until the official announcement of the motive, the investigation preferred to keep details secret and refer to the situation only as a sensitive factor. Psychologists and investigators prepared the ground for the final block of investigation, where all previously hidden motives should be presented to the court in clearly formulated and substantiated form. Thus, the case gradually moved from clarifying factual details to deeper analysis of causes and conditions that formed the foundation for the crime. The arrest of both parents allowed the investigation to exclude the risk of new attempts at evidence destruction and focus completely on examining the personality of the suspects and the final revelation of their motivation. The trial in the case of Sergei and Irina K. began on the 26th of January 2025 in the courtroom of the Stepnoy District Court. Throughout the entire investigation, the investigators carefully collected details of events that took place at the beginning of March of the previous year. The investigative committee officially came to a final conclusion, recorded in the materials of the criminal case. The motive for Sergei and Irina's actions was the fear of losing two social benefits for care and disability. As the investigation established, on the morning of the 5th of March 2024 at around 9:30, Sergei and Irina together brought 7-year-old Anton into the basement, prepared in advance under the kitchen floor, after which Sergei tied him with metal wire to the heating pipe. Then the hatch was firmly closed. The recently purchased piece of linoleum was laid over it, and a heavy cabinet was placed on top. The parents planned that the social services inspection would pass quickly and without consequences, after which Anton could be released again. In court, the prosecutor presented the entire chain of evidence in detail. First, video recordings from the camera of the Stroy Market store were presented, where Sergei was clearly documented purchasing wire rope, lock, and linoleum. Then, the results of the fire technical examination were presented, which confirmed the fact of conscious destruction of the packaging of these materials at the shed of the house on the evening of the 9th of March. No less convincing were the mobile operator's data on SMS messages that Irina sent on behalf of Anton from her personal phone. Geolocation data clearly pointed to the K family house at the time of sending the messages. In the same period, Anton's grandmother was hundreds of kilometers away from the settlement, which was confirmed by cameras on Highway M7 and gas station receipts. A separate important detail was the genetic examination, which completely excluded the presence of third parties on the wire rope and lock. This completely confirmed the conclusions that no strangers could have been involved in what happened. The forensic examination clearly indicated the period of Anton's death from the 6th to 8th of March. The cause was fluid deficiency. That is, the boy could not survive in the closed space of the basement for more than 2 to 3 days. In the court proceedings, the spouses gave testimony against each other for the first time. Sergei openly stated that it was exactly Irina who insisted on hiding Anton before the inspection, out of fear of losing important benefits. He emphasized that he did not think everything would turn out this way. Irina, in turn, stated that she was convinced of the short-term nature of the situation. "I thought the inspection would end in 1 to 2 hours, and we would immediately release him again." The court perceived these statements as an attempt to shift responsibility onto each other. However, this did not change the qualification of the crime. The concluding part of the trial was devoted to reading the conclusions of the comprehensive psychiatric examination conducted at the FGBNU, named after Serbsky. The doctors officially concluded, Sergei and Irina K. are absolutely sane. Signs of mental disorders or affective states that could mitigate responsibility were not found. Their actions bore a rational and completely conscious character. The final verdict was read by the judge in complete silence of those present in the courtroom. Sergei K. and Irina K. were found guilty under Point W, Part 2 of Article 105 of the Criminal Code of the RF, murder of a minor committed by a group of persons in prior conspiracy. Sergei K. was sentenced to 20 years of imprisonment, with sentence serving in a strict regime colony. Irina K. received a sentence of 18 years of imprisonment, also in a strict regime colony. After the verdict was announced, the judge closed the session. Court bailiffs led the defendants out of the courtroom. A few minutes later, the iron cell door slammed behind them, completely separating them from their former life. No one looked back anymore. After completion of the court proceedings, some not fully clarified details remained in the investigation materials. Criminalists documented several old cuts on the wooden frame of the hatch that could not be precisely dated. These cuts might indicate that the basement had been used previously for holding Anton. However, final documented confirmation of this was not obtained, and officially this information remained unanswered. Thus, the investigation completely and unconditionally proved the identity of the criminals, the motive and method of committing the crime, and refuted all previously emerged false versions. However, the question of whether this was the first and only time the basement in the house on Forest Street was used for such purposes remained in the category of officially unresolved facts. Hereby, case number 24724 was officially closed. In criminology, serial perpetrators occupy a special place. Figures who spread fear in citizens' souls through their inhuman acts. Experience shows that such personalities sometimes become objects of unhealthy worship. Tracking down such merciless persecutors is no easy task. Fortunately, modern law enforcement officers are equipped with an entire arsenal of advanced technologies that significantly facilitate their work. Today, this enables solving puzzles that investigators have been puzzling over for years. As the story in question shows, investigation results sometimes exceed the boldest hypotheses of law enforcement agencies. This story begins in the spring days of 1986 in the small town of Tacoma, which stretches in Washington state in the western United States. The main character of the story is Michella Welch, born on the 7th of June, 1973. She lived in Tacoma with her family, her mother and 2 younger sisters, Angela and Nicole. Fate arranged it so that the father was no longer in the family, and all worries rested on the mother's shoulders. Alone with 3 daughters, Michella's mother faced difficult life circumstances. She had to work hard to provide the children with a worthy life. Thanks to her professionalism, the woman was able to get a good position in a real estate agency. Her efforts were not in vain. The salary was enough not only to cover basic needs, but also for small savings. To reconcile work and childcare, she hired a nanny. Furthermore, the mother found the opportunity to pay for piano lessons for all 3 daughters. Michella was particularly fascinated by music. Her environment described her as a cheerful and trusting young woman. But there was another quality that her relatives noticed. She was very brave. Sometimes, even too much so. Now, on the threshold of adolescence, There were only a few months left until her next birthday. Like many her age, Michella strived for more independence. However, she did not intend to distance herself from the family, but on the contrary wanted to show her mother that she was already grown up and responsible enough to care for her younger sisters. To prove this, she asked for permission to take her sisters to the park without adults. Despite her daughter's young age, the mother allowed herself to be persuaded and permitted the girls to go to the park independently. The spring day on the 26th of March 1986 was beautiful. The mother went to work, and Michelle prepared with her sisters for an outing. For the young woman, this day was something special. In the morning, when everyone had woken up, she helped the younger ones get dressed. The plan was to spend a few hours in the park. Around 10 o'clock, the children rode their bicycles toward the Puget Park Cultural Center in Tacoma, their favorite place in the city. It was only a few kilometers away, which for children on bicycles was a matter of minutes. They didn't have much time. They had to return before the nanny's arrival, who was to take them to music school. Although the young women were alone, the older sister watched over them. The park was then considered a quiet and safe place, surrounded by houses and people. The outing was not planned to be long, which is why the mother allowed them to go. She was proud of how grown-up her daughter was becoming and wanted to show her best qualities. Arriving at the park, the children played a little when Michelle suddenly remembered that she had forgotten the breakfast boxes at home. They wanted to eat right in the park at the picnic tables. Since she didn't want to leave the younger ones hungry, the young woman decided to quickly ride home to get the food. Around 11 o'clock, she got on her bicycle and asked her sisters to wait for her on the playground. During Michelle's absence, the younger ones went to the nearest restroom in the park. They knew the area well. When Angela and Nicole returned, they did not find their older sister, but they were surprised that Michelle's bicycle stood next to theirs. They assumed she had already returned. The sisters thought Michelle had gone to look for them when she didn't find them in place, or she might have gone away. They began searching for her and noticed that the breakfast boxes were lying on the picnic bench. It was obvious that Michelle had returned from home. They just had to wait for her. The young women ate something, but their sister still didn't appear. They had a secret call, and they began using it to call Michelle. They remained in the park and continued calling for her. Basically, the young women were alone and unsupervised in the park area. At that time, there were neither mobile phones nor ubiquitous surveillance cameras like today. Angela and Nicole called for their older sister, but no answer came. Assuming that Michelle might have lost them, the girls made their way to the main entrance of the park. They even joked that they had missed each other because of a restroom visit. Without recognizing the seriousness of the situation, the sisters stayed longer than planned. It was time for music lessons. The nanny, who had returned home, did not find the children there. Knowing their plans, she drove to the park by car. Relieved, the woman found Angela and Nicole at the main entrance, but Michelle was nowhere to be seen. After hearing the students' report, the nanny examined the bicycles and the place where they had been left. All three called for Michelle for a long time, but without success. Finally, the nanny contacted the mother at work and informed her about the incident. The worried woman urgently requested time off and turned to the police to report the disappearance of her 12-year-old daughter. However, law enforcement initially did not give the situation due attention. In their opinion, a girl of this age could simply have taken advantage of the absence of adults and gone about her own business. Perhaps she had met a friend and, absorbed in conversation, had not noticed how time passed. They tried to calm the worried mother by assuring her that her daughter would return soon. But the woman knew this was unlikely. The day was very important for Michelle. The responsible girl was preparing to prove herself and could not leave her younger sisters alone for long. The mother was certain something had happened to her daughter, and there was no time to lose. After persistent urging from the mother, the officer finally recognized that the situation required immediate action. The police immediately began searching for Michelle, focusing on the park. Several groups of officers arrived with tracking dogs to speed up the process. The first investigation revealed nothing unusual. No traces were found, so volunteers were involved in the operation. The mother also participated in the search, while a nanny stayed with the younger girls. The woman did not give up hope of finding her daughter quickly. She suspected that Michelle might have simply fallen from her bicycle, possibly sustained a bruise and could not return to the playground independently, or something similar had happened and the girl needed help. The investigators examining the crime scene were less optimistic. They suspected that Michelle had gotten into trouble after her return and disappeared while the playground was empty. Unfortunately, the mother's hopes were not to be fulfilled. Around midnight, police officers with tracking dogs reached a remote path in the park where there was a recently used fireplace. There, they encountered a shocking discovery. Experts examined the find and concluded that this was a criminal incident. However, the murder weapon was not found at the location. Police thoroughly searched the entire area with dogs, but the perpetrator had probably taken it with them and disposed of it at another location. It is difficult to imagine the mother's feelings when she learned this terrible news. The woman wanted to give her older daughter the opportunity to show independence, but it ended in tragedy. Possibly the younger girls accidentally escaped danger while they were in the bathroom and did not attract the perpetrator's attention. These incidents shook the local community. The nature of the incident indicated the presence of an extremely dangerous person in the city who was still at large. The news about what happened to Michelle put the residents in a state of shock. It became clear that no one could feel completely safe until this person was found. Police were overwhelmed with citizen inquiries. People urgently demanded that law enforcement agencies arrest the perpetrator as quickly as possible to restore peace to the city. However, officers had too little information, which is why they turned to the public to get help in searching for the suspect. That same day, a 13-year-old classmate of the missing girl came to the investigators. She reported that she had seen Michelle in the morning with her younger sisters in the park when they were playing on the playground before departure. The girl also told about a man who observed the children for a long time from a distance. Although the stranger showed no aggression, his unrelated attention seemed suspicious. Unfortunately, the young witness could not warn her friends about the possible danger because her parents took her home. Nevertheless, thanks to her statement, it was possible to create a fairly detailed portrait of the alleged perpetrator. This composite sketch became the only essential clue for the investigation. After the image was published, another witness contacted police, a man who had been jogging that morning. However, he was training in the neighboring Point Defense Park, which is only 5 kilometers from Budget Park. According to his words, he noticed a person who looked very similar to the composite sketch. At that moment, the stranger's behavior did not arouse suspicion. However, this statement suggested that the alleged perpetrator was not randomly near the girls, but was purposefully visiting different parks to search for a potential target. The investigation in Michelle's case extended over almost half a year. Despite all efforts, the investigations reached a dead end. The forensic capabilities of that time were limited, and officers faced an unsolvable task. Neither evidence nor suspects could be found. But the tragedy did not end there. 5 months later, under similar circumstances, another young woman disappeared in Point Defense Park, Jennifer Bastian, a student born in 1973. She also lived with her family in Tacoma. What happened deeply shocked everyone. Society was horrified that law enforcement agencies could not prevent the disappearance of another person. Jennifer was remembered as a lively and active young woman. Her interests were diverse, from horseback riding and dancing to gymnastics. She particularly loved bicycle riding. Bike tours were for her not only pleasure but also an opportunity to train her endurance. Jennifer was enthusiastic about sports. On the 4th of August 1986, she set out again for training. After lunch, around 14:30, she rode to the park. Normally, she cycled there with a friend, but this time the friend could not accompany her. Jennifer left her parents a note stating that she would spend the whole day in the park and return around 6:30. However, at the agreed time, she did not come home. The worried parents first called their daughter's friends. Jennifer was very sociable and could spontaneously change her plans. For example, visit someone. Unfortunately, none of the friends had seen the young woman. Then the parents contacted police. Law enforcement agencies, remembering the recent incident, took the report very seriously and responded immediately to the call. Investigators noticed similarities between the circumstances of Jennifer's disappearance and the earlier case of Michelle. The main search efforts focused on the park where Jennifer wanted to bicycle. The arriving police officers used specially trained dogs in the operation. However, the extensive park area, which was significantly larger than Puget Park, made the task considerably more difficult. Jennifer's parents came to the search location and provided personal items of their daughter for the tracking dog's work. Despite intensive efforts by investigators, the four-legged helpers could not find traces of the missing person that day. Some questioned witnesses mentioned that they saw Jennifer riding a bicycle around 18 o'clock on one of the park paths, but noticed nothing unusual. News about the incident spread like lightning. The public was disturbed. Many drew parallels between this case and the recent incident with Michelle. Disturbing rumors circulated in the city about a possible perpetrator who was acting according to a specific plan. After a media appeal, many volunteers joined the search operation. The missing person's parents made an official appeal to anyone who might have any information about Jennifer to contact police. After seeing the news report, Michelle's mother, who was still suffering from the tragedy that occurred 5 months ago, approached the police station. Her case remained unsolved, and news about a possible repetition of the situation deeply affected the grieving mother. She understood Jennifer's parents' feelings and wanted to support the family, so she actively participated in the search. Less than half a year ago, she herself was in a similar situation. During this time, investigators drew no hasty conclusions and hoped that Jennifer might have gone away with friends or due to possible family problems. However, these were only assumptions, attempts to find a more optimistic explanation, since such behavior did not fit the missing person's character at all. Despite all efforts by police and volunteers, it was not possible to obtain essential information about the girl's whereabouts. The situation remained unchanged until the 26th of August. On that day, a man approached the police station who had made his morning run on the less frequented paths of the park. According to his words, he perceived a strong, unpleasant odor in one of the remote corners of the forest. Without investigating the source of the smell himself, but knowing about Jennifer's recent disappearance, he decided to report this to investigators immediately after returning home. Investigators arrived promptly in the indicated part of the park. However, precisely determining the source of the odor proved to be a difficult task. The search had already been going on continuously for 2 days when the police made another disturbing discovery in a dense part of the forest, not far from a footpath. Nearby, the student's bicycle was also found. The find was carefully hidden in a small depression, covered with leaves and branches. That is exactly why it could not be discovered earlier until disturbing signs appeared. Due to the condition of the find, immediate identification was impossible. The investigators carefully invited Jennifer's parents for identification without telling them about the discovery beforehand. The father immediately recognized the clothes in which his daughter had left the house. The examination revealed that Jennifer had been subjected to unwanted treatment. It was obvious that Jennifer desperately resisted, but she simply did not have enough strength to resist the perpetrator. Naturally, these details were a new shock for the public. The darkest assumptions had been confirmed. People immediately saw a connection between this incident and Michelle's case. Both incidents occurred in parks where children rode bicycles. Although some details differed, the episodes were very similar. Moreover, both looked similar externally, of the same type and age, pretty with blue eyes. Local families with children found themselves in a state of great concern. The once quiet town with a low crime rate became a place where children were in danger. Now no one could feel safe anymore. people were afraid to let their children go outside to play. The public put pressure on law enforcement agencies, demanding to find the culprit as quickly as possible. Despite all efforts, the investigation could not provide substantial evidence so far. The physical evidence found at the crime scene, including clothing fragments and biological samples, did not bring the expected results. In those years, the technologies for analyzing genetic material were not yet developed enough to help solve the case. Time passed. The expectation of the perpetrator's imminent arrest stretched over many years and then decades. In the autumn of 2008, a department for investigating old unsolved cases was established in Tacoma's police department. At this time, new methods of DNA investigation, genetic genealogy, phenotyping, and other advanced forensic technologies had emerged. Law enforcement agencies hoped that these innovations would help shed light on many mysterious cases that had remained unsolved for years. In 2013, the turn finally came for the events of 27 years ago related to the disappearance of Michelle and Jennifer. Investigator Lindsay Wade took on the case and felt a special connection to it. Although Lindsay did not personally know the missing girls, she had grown up in Tacoma. At the time of these tragic events, she was about the same age as them. The investigator understood that she herself could have been in their place. All these years, Lindsay lived in an atmosphere of concern, knowing that a dangerous perpetrator still had not been found and could be hiding somewhere nearby. For more than 2 decades, he had managed to escape justice. Now, with access to the latest investigative technologies, Lindsay was firmly determined to find the culprit and bring him to justice. These terrible events from the past inspired Lindsay to take the path of a law enforcer. Already at a young age, she developed a passion for criminology and dreamed of solving complex cases. To achieve this goal, the woman went through a long path from a simple patrol officer to an investigator, working on numerous investigations. But the mystery of the disappearance of 2 students never left her thoughts. Thanks to Lindsay's efforts and her team, an extensive list of 2,300 men was compiled who had, in the past, somehow attracted the attention of law enforcement agencies. They all lived near the crime scenes in 1986. This list also included all those who were nearby on the day of the disappearance or had any connection to the girls. Interestingly, the police found much evidence at the crime scenes in the year of the incident. However, the technologies of that time did not allow useful information to be extracted from them. These items were carefully preserved in anticipation of progress. When it finally became possible to analyze the genetic material from the crime scenes, something unexpected happened that surprised even experienced investigators. Originally, the investigators were convinced that one person was behind everything due to the similarity of circumstances. However, checking the collected samples revealed that the profiles did not match. It turned out that for 2 decades, 2 extremely dangerous individuals had been walking freely through the streets of Tacoma. Miraculously, no one else was hurt, although this might be related to the perpetrators having moved and operating in other cities. The obtained genetic profiles were entered into the police database. Unfortunately, the investigators' hopes were disappointed. None of the samples matched previously registered criminals. Knowing that manual checking of 2,300 people would take years, Lindsay set about narrowing the circle of suspects. She excluded everyone who did not match the description in any respect. This significantly simplified the task. In the end, 160 people remained who were prioritized for testing. Most of them had been held accountable for various offenses in the past. In parallel, the investigators turned to genetic genealogy methods. It was assumed that analyzing existing DNA profiles would help identify relatives of possible involved persons. Unfortunately, this approach brought no results in Michelle's case, but the situation with Jennifer proved to be different. The genealogy experts suspected that the person connected to Jennifer's disappearance might bear one of the following surnames: Nama, Holbrook, Smith, or Washburn. Ultimately, there was only one match, a certain Robert Washburn. Interestingly, he had not previously appeared as a suspect in this case. On the contrary, Washburn had acted as a witness and reported to police about a suspicious man seen in the park after the first young woman Michelle's disappearance. It turned out that Washburn was that runner who had been mentioned earlier in the case. This circumstance raised a number of questions for the investigators. From this moment on, in the framework of the investigation into the second young woman's disappearance, the main figure from the first case appeared, with whom law enforcement agencies wanted to have a conversation. The suspicion of a possible connection between these cases arose. Until 2016, the collection of DNA samples from the remaining 160 men from the list created by the investigator continued. The process was lengthy. The laboratory processed the analyses in batches of about 20 sets per round. Although no matches had been found so far, the work was not stopped. The investigators continued methodically checking each sample in the hope that this would one day lead to a breakthrough in the investigations. In May 2018, Lindsay received an unexpected call. On the other end of the line was the new investigator Jean Miller, who had taken on the old case. Miller shared amazing news. Almost 32 years after the two tragic incidents, a match was found in the last 18 samples. It pointed to the involvement of a certain Robert in Jennifer's disappearance, the same witness who was referred to as the runner from the park. For some reason, he had not been checked before. Now Robert was 60 years old, while at the time of the events he had been very young. He had grown up in Tacoma but moved to Illinois after the incident. Amazingly, the man had no criminal background. In every respect, he appeared to be a law-abiding citizen. After moving, Robert began a relationship, married, and the couple had a daughter with special needs. The marriage broke up, but Robert continued to care for the child and supported his daughter in every way. All acquaintances described Robert as hardworking, quiet, and friendly. But decades later, this reputation came into question. On the 11th of May 2018, Robert Washburn was arrested. He was charged in connection with the Jennifer Bastian case. During interrogation, Robert was very nervous, so much so that all his clothes were soaked with sweat. The investigators saw this as a sign that he was hiding something. His behavior seemed typical of someone who has secrets. Obviously, the arrest was a great shock for him. He probably no longer expected that the past would resurface after so many years. Robert denied the accusations and called the DNA match an error. Of course, everything was checked multiple times to exclude the possibility of an error. Michelle's case remained unsolved. A month after Robert's arrest, the DNA analysis of all 160 men was completed. None of them showed a connection to Michelle's disappearance. The police then turned to a company that specializes in DNA investigations. The researchers applied advanced DNA analysis and genealogy methods, narrowing the circle of potential suspects to 2 brothers. Now it was necessary to obtain their genetic material for comparison. However, the investigators could not simply demand samples. This had to be a voluntary decision. To avoid arousing suspicion, the investigators resorted to a ruse. The brothers were observed. One of them visited a restaurant where he used and left behind a napkin. This made it possible to obtain the necessary material for analysis. Even if he had proven to be uninvolved, this would have helped to remove him from the suspect list and continue the investigations. The results showed a complete match with the profile of the person connected to Michelle's disappearance. It was 66-year-old Gary Charles Hartman. At the time of the first incident, he was 34 years old. Surprisingly, like Robert, he was considered an honorable citizen. He had no problems with the law. Gary worked for many years as a doctor in a psychiatric clinic, where he was known for his calm and composure. There were no complaints from patients about him, and no one in his circle could imagine that he was capable of such actions. On the 20th of June 2018, Gary was arrested on suspicion of involvement in Michelle's disappearance. He did not confess his guilt. Meanwhile, the trial in Robert's case was scheduled for 2019. Until the trial, he was taken into custody without the possibility of bail. After several months, he unexpectedly changed his statement and confessed his involvement in Jennifer's disappearance, presumably hoping for a reduced sentence. However, he denied other accusations. In the investigator's opinion, Robert was possibly aware of the severity of his actions and therefore feared confessing everything completely. Ultimately, he was sentenced to 27 years imprisonment. Remarkably, Robert tried to participate in the investigations in Michelle's case. He was on the witness list several months before Jennifer's disappearance, in which he was later involved himself. The investigators suspected that he wanted to appear in this case somehow. Possibly this case had made such a strong impression on him that he was driven to similar actions. This could explain the somewhat different nature of the incidents. Robert seemed not to have reached the level that Gary demonstrated. Robert himself did not comment on these assumptions. The trial against Gary Hartman took place in March 2022. The defense made every effort to exonerate the defendant by trying to shift responsibility onto Robert. The lawyer insisted on possible errors in conducting the investigations and evidence collection. However, the prosecution remained steadfast. The match of DNA profiles could not be coincidental. Having no success, the defense changed its tactics and focused on Hartman's mental state at the time of the incident. It turned out that he had a difficult childhood and presumably went through a psychological crisis during the critical phase. Additionally, Gary struggled with addictions for a long time, which strongly influenced his mental balance. At the end of the trial, Hartman confessed his guilt. Despite the lawyer's attempts to achieve acquittal due to his client's insanity, these arguments did not convince the jurors, and they reached a guilty verdict. The court sentenced Gary Hartman to 26.5 years imprisonment. The relatives of the victims considered this punishment insufficient, even taking the confession into account. Many were surprised that Gary received a lighter sentence than Robert, although his actions were more serious. Nevertheless, society felt relief that both dangerous perpetrators were isolated from society. In May 2019, a new bill was presented, named after Jennifer and Michelle. The parents of the young women advocated for the passage of a law in Washington state that would expand DNA collection possibilities. According to this, DNA samples should be able to be collected mandatorily from both adults and minors suspected of serious offenses. Special attention was placed on crimes involving inappropriate treatment,